History often remembers the powerful, the brilliant, and the tyrannical. But what about the rulers who are simply there? Today, we're talking about a sultan who ascended to the throne late in life, only to preside over the final chaotic collapse of a once mighty empire. This is the story of Mehmed V, the 35th Ottoman Sultan, a man more symbol than sovereign. For most of his life, Mehmed Reed, as he was known, lived in the shadows. Following Ottoman tradition, he was confined to the palace for nearly 30 years, first by his uncle and then by his own brother, the formidable Sultan. The second, imagine living in gilded isolation, cut off from the world, with books and poetry as your only companions. He developed a deep interest in Persian literature and became a skilled calligrapher, but he had zero political or military experience. He was a scholar, not a statesman. Then, in 1909, everything changed. A political earthquake known as the Young Turk Revolution shook the empire. The Young Turks, a revolutionary group of reform-minded officers and intellectuals, were determined to modernize the state they forced. The second to restore the constitution and shortly after deposed him. Suddenly, at the age of 64, the reclusive Prince Mehmed Reed was thrust onto the throne as Sultan Mehmed V. From the very beginning, it was clear who held the real power. The Young Turks, led by the powerful triumvirate known as the Three Pashas Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Jemel Pasha were the ones calling the shots. Mehmed V was a constitutional monarch, a figurehead. His role was largely ceremonial, signing decrees, attending functions, and providing a symbol of continuity for the empire. He was a gentle, well-intentioned man, but completely out of his depth in the viper's nest of early 20th century politics. His reign began with a goodwill tour of the empire's troubled Balkan provinces Thrace, Macedonia, and Albania. The hope was that the Sultan's presence would calm ethnic tensions and promote a sense of Ottoman unity. It was a nice idea, but the fires of nationalism had been stoked for far too long. The tour was a public relations success, but it did nothing to solve the underlying problems. The empire was a powder keg, and the fuse was already lit. Almost immediately, the empire was plunged into war. In 1911, Italy, eager to build its own colonial empire, invaded the Ottoman provinces of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, modern-day Libya. The Ottoman army, disorganized and far from the front, couldn't put up an effective resistance. Italy's modern navy dominated the seas, and its forces quickly occupied the coastal cities. The Italo-Turkish War was a humiliating defeat, forcing the Ottomans to cede their last territories in North Africa. It was a clear sign of the empire's weakness, and its hungry neighbors were watching closely. The vultures began to circle. Seeing the Ottomans weakened, the Balkan states of Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Montenegro formed a secret alliance. In 1912, they launched a coordinated attack, sparking the First Balkan War. The result was a catastrophe for the Ottomans. The Balkan League's armies steamrolled through Ottoman territories in Europe. Cities that had been part of the empire for centuries, like Thessaloniki, Skopje, and the historic former capital of Edirne, fell one by one. The Ottoman military, plagued by poor leadership and internal political divisions, collapsed. Within months, the empire had lost almost all of its European territory. The shock of this defeat was immense. A coup in 1913 brought the Three Pashas to absolute power. They blamed the previous government for the loss and promised to restore national pride. They got their chance when the Balkan allies, having defeated the Ottomans, immediately began fighting amongst themselves over the spoils. This was the Second Balkan War. The Ottomans, led by Enver Pasha, seized the opportunity to launch a surprise counterattack and recaptured the city of Edirne. It was a small victory in a sea of defeats, but it was a massive propaganda win for the Young Turk government. Enver Pasha was hailed as a national hero, the conqueror of Edirne, but this brief moment of triumph was just the prelude to a much greater storm. In the summer of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, plunging Europe into the First World War. The Ottoman Empire was initially neutral, but the government was deeply divided. The three pashas, particularly the German-trained Enver Pasha, were convinced that aligning with the Central Powers Germany and Austria-Hungary was the empire's best chance for survival, and perhaps even for reclaiming lost territories. Sultan Mehmed V reportedly favored neutrality. He understood the immense risks of joining such a colossal conflict, but his opinion mattered little. In a secret deal, Enver Pasha and the Young Turk government aligned the empire with Germany to give the decision religious legitimacy. The government had Mehmed V, in his capacity as Caliph of all Muslims, declare a jihad, a holy war, against the Allied powers Britain, France, and Russia. The call to jihad was broadcast across the Muslim world, hoping to inspire uprisings in British, French, and Russian colonies. For the most part, it failed. Most Muslims saw the war for what it was, a political conflict, not a religious one. The Ottoman Empire was now fighting a war on multiple fronts. In the east, they faced the Russians. In the Caucasus Mountains, in Mesopotamia, they fought the British who were pushing up from the Persian Gulf, aiming for Baghdad. And perhaps most famously, the Ottomans defended their homeland in the Gallipoli campaign. When Allied forces, primarily composed of British, French, Australian, and New Zealander troops, landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1915, they aimed to capture the straits, knock the Ottomans out of the war, and open a supply line to Russia. The battle for Gallipoli was brutal, a 9-month saga of trench warfare, immense bravery and horrific casualties on both sides. The Ottoman soldiers, under the brilliant command of a then unknown officer named Mustafa Kemal, put up a heroic and ultimately successful defense. They held the high ground and repelled every Allied assault. The failure of the Gallipoli campaign was a huge blow to the Allies and a monumental victory for the Ottomans, boosting morale and solidifying the Young Turk regime's hold on power. However, the war brought about one of the darkest chapters in the empire's history. Under the pretext of wartime security, the Young Turk government initiated the systematic deportation and massacre of the Armenian population. Falsely accusing them of collaborating with the enemy, the government orchestrated a genocide that resulted in the deaths of over 1 million Armenians. While Sultan Mehmed V signed the deportation laws, his actual involvement and knowledge of the full extent of the atrocities remained debated. As a figurehead, it is likely he was either kept in the dark about the true nature of the policy or was powerless to stop it. Regardless, it remains a horrific stain on the history of his reign. As the war dragged on, the empire's resources were stretched to the breaking point. Famine and disease ravaged the civilian population. The economy collapsed. By 1918, it was clear the Central Powers were losing the war. The Ottoman armies were in retreat on all fronts, but Sultan Mehmed V would not see the final end. In July 1918, just 4 months before the armistice that would dissolve his empire, he died at the age of 73. He had reigned for 9 years, a period of non-stop crisis, war, and political turmoil. He was succeeded by his younger brother, Mehmed VI, who would have the unfortunate honor of being the very last sultan of the Ottoman Empire. So how should we remember Mehmed V? He wasn't a tyrant or a great reformer. He was a quiet, cultured man who was unprepared for the throne and the tidal wave of history that crashed over him. He was a prisoner for half his life and a puppet for the other half. His story is a tragic one, a personal reflection of the empire's own helplessness in its final days. He was the sultan who reigned but did not rule, a silent witness to the end of a 600-year-old world. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. See you next time.